Good afternoon, all. It gives me great pleasure to give a talk in this wonderful faculty development program. I have checked the various talks and profiles of speakers. It's a well compiled workshop which you are all going through. Thank you for the invitation, management team. Unlike whatever I have done earlier during the last 10 years, I thought I should be in line with whatever is the topic of this FDP, which is Middle Science Research. I thought I should present some latest trends which are happening in organic photovoltaics. Uh, those of you are waiting for me to talk about the second spectroscopy. I'm not doing it. Sorry for it. What I would do is the following. In this next 1 hour, I would try to convince you why organic photovoltaics is a way towards development of low cost green solar energy technology. What is green? It's not the green leafy vegetables you see in the picture, but it's more like which is most environmental sensitive thing. Okay, so this is the plan. I would motivate you why we need such technology, introduce you the technology, and it's not just one or two kinds of solar cells. There are a lot of different types of solar cells which are available with organic photovoltaics, but there are a lot of problems associated with them. So I would just introduce you what are the various technologies and the problems associated with this, and finally I would discuss our latest result on development of low cost organic solar cells. Yeah, so let's start with the standard slide of everyone who talks in this field. What are the grand challenges of mankind? And if you look at the top 10 problems, these are the list, starting from energy, food, environment, poverty, terrorism, war, disease, education, democracy, and population. Now, if you look at all these things, these are all a big problem by itself. I mean, you can write textbooks and theses, and you can have a lot of FDPs on each of these problems, right? However, if we see one undercurrent situation which is common for everything, it is the so-called sustainable development. If we as scientists work towards a sustainable development model for the future, then all the problems which are listed there can find their own solutions. Now, this talk being in energy, I would start and I would concentrate only on the energy part. However, all of you, I'm sure many of you have interest in any of these 10 things. You should also look at various aspects of how to contribute towards this kind of sustainable development. Let's start with the energy issues, the world market energy consumption. This is a survey taken some years back in terms of what is the energy consumption in exajoule per year, which is 10 power 18 joules per year. If you look at it, the projection for the next 10 years, now we are on 2020, we're already in 2020, is going up. Right? It is going up and it will grow further. Now, if you look at the various proved natural resources of based on fossils or fossil fuels, for example, the crude oil, natural gas, quality, high quality, low quality coal, etc. These are in principle sufficient presently. If you look at it, the requirement is how much? 702 joules, exajoules in another 10 years. And if you look at it, we do have sufficient amount of fossil fuels to survive for some time. This is a review in 2007. Okay, it's about 13 years back which I started. So from that point of time, we do have sufficient fossil fuel. However, we know by definition of fossil fuel, it has been something which is evolved over I don't know how many hundreds of centuries, right? So if we run out of this fuel, we need to wait for another hundreds of centuries for it to replenish. And going by this last problem, which is the population, this population growth is leading to a heavy demand on energy. And that's why one needs to look at what are the various issues to various alternatives to this fossil fuel. And as I said just now, if we project the trend of depletion of fossil fuels in the next coming decades, we see that the oil is the one which goes out as fast by 2020. The gas would survive for some more time, and the coal would stay for some more time. Let's say till 2090 or 3000. Okay, so till some tens of years, we can rely on the fossil fuels. However, this estimate is made in 2019. Okay, and this is 2019 story, and this estimate is made based on the assumption that no alternative forms are being used at the moment. And so, if we run out of everything, the world will going to stop. So, one of the most common things which people have started looking at is harnessing the solar radiation. Now, if I show you this picture, this is the annual solar energy arriving at surface of Earth, right? Which is 1366 watt per meter square, and this is just the one direction of it. And importantly for us, the total solar energy that arrives at the surface of Earth per year is this number. It's a huge number compared to what we have from fossil fuel. Okay, fossil fuel is at 6,600 exajoule, the available resources which is present, and we per year are getting solar energy of this amount. Is it not wonderful? It is wonderful, yes. But the problem lies in how well are we harnessing that. If you look at it, the resources available of solar is 2730,000 per year. However, what we actually implemented with our possible solar cell technology is just 0.31 exajoule per year, and so on for wind, geothermal, hydro. So the percentage to be explored for solar is much higher, 0.0012%. This is what is explored, which means 100 minus 0.0012% is the possibility of growth in solar cell technology. Okay, so that's why total true reserves of fossil fuel is approximately 1.4% of solar energy that reaches the surface of the Earth. And so it is important for us to find ways to really harness solar energy. Right? So this chart, which is again in 2019, gives you how much of world consumption is done from a fuel point of view. Again, natural gas, oil, and coal takes the major chunk, whereas the renewables, which is based on the solar, wind, geothermal, hydro, so not hydro, just geothermal, these three, is just a small fraction of it. And so, without any doubt, we know that if the industry which wants to put its money in something which is going to grow, it would always put on something like renewables. And importantly, this particular graph shows that the solar power, solar PV and other solar related technologies is what is the future. It's growing up, and in 2100, by the time 2100 comes, we should be able to get the maximum power requirement from the solar. Okay, whereas all the other things is going to go down. Right. So as per the latest trends published by International Energy Agency, renewable power capacity is set to expand by 50% between 2019 to 24 by solar photovoltaics. This is the international futuristic survey. The installation of solar PV on homes, commercial buildings, industrial facilities is set to take off over the next 5 years, transforming the way electricity is generated and consumed. Again, keep in mind, these things are all done before COVID. So with COVID, we have no idea what is going to happen, but for sure, the requirement of energy is there. As long as the requirement of energy is there, one needs to work on how to generate electricity. From the talk in the morning, you might have learned how to store the electricity. So generating is not the only thing, storing is also important. So the theme of today, which is generation and storage of energy, is something which is going to fuel or help us in the future. Right. So this is the projected from the International Energy Agency, and if you look at the projection, it is in terms of gigawatt. The solar PV is supposed to get the maximum push for the next 5 years. Importantly, now we in India are also a fast developing industry in terms of solar. The solar installed capacity reached 35.12 gigawatt as of June 30th, 2020. Okay, I invite you to look at this particular website. It's in Wikipedia. So just type solar power in India in Wikipedia and you can read all that is happening. It is fantastic. Just look at that particular page. You would get to know how much we as country are pushing for this renewables, and we are in the right direction. That's the beauty about it. Okay, now let's start with the solar cell, which we all are known, which all know it. The silicon solar cell, right? This is the silicon solar cell. These are silicon plants. You see that most often, more places, right? So how does it work? It works on this PN junction, right? PN junction diode, where the photons are being absorbed by the depletion layer, electron hole pairs are formed, and the electrons hole would get dissociated and go to the respective metal contacts. So this is the basic idea. I'm sure all of you are teaching would be well aware of this. And importantly, again, this is the first generation solar cell and the most mature technology. When I say mature technology, it is already available in the market and people know what to expect out of it, and people also know how much to expect out of it, right? So this is the point about the technology which is mature, which comes in the market. Things which are done in the lab scale, people have no idea what's going to happen. Only we researchers feel happy about it. We see 1%, 2% increase and we feel happy about it. But then the industry guys have no interest in those things. It is the most proven technology which they want, and silicon solar cell is the most proven technology. Because of this reason, high efficiency. The problem is still we are getting the high efficiency at the high cost. Okay, the single junction of extracting energy for photons approaching the theoretical efficiency is about 33%. The drawback is high cost manufacturing process. Irrespective of this, the entire electronic industry lies on silicon, right? So silicon solar cells is something which comes as a natural outcome of whatever is the most mature technology, and so silicon solar cells is going to stay forever as far as silicon is there. Okay, so this is the first generation. We are going to come about why we need other things. I want to just explain something more fundamental about silicon solar cell. That is this particular graph, which is the Fermi level picture of how the PN junction are aligned. If you look at it, this is the basic first year physics course. We all talk about it. The Fermi level shifts towards the conduction band for the n-type. The Fermi level shifts towards the valence band for the p-type, and in the intrinsic region, it is in the center. So if you look at the central part, which is the depletion region, the Fermi level is in the center, right in the middle. And so when we bring these two PN junction together, okay, and by virtue of this reference point where we keep the reference to be the potential, there is a small change in the potential between the entire end region and the P region, okay, which we call as the VI or the built-in potential. So this potential is already there. This is not something which you can put a multimeter and see this potential. It doesn't work that way, but there is a certain potential difference between these two. It's called a built-in potential. Okay, overall, a diode, PN junction diode, will remain neutral. Okay, if you just put a multimeter and look at the voltage, it's still a neutral. But then within the PN junction, there is a built-in potential. Okay, why it is important is this built-in potential is what allows or that drives the dissociation of the electron hole pairs. So when the electron hole pairs are formed in the depletion region upon absorption of the photons, it requires some energy to dissociate. What is energy? It's called the binding energy of the exciton binding energy, what we call about it. And so the coulomбically bound electron hole pair needs to be dissociated, and for that the built-in potential helps. Okay, and so getting a current out of silicon cell is one of the most easy thing. The only problem is making a silicon solar cell. So this is the procedure for it. We all are happy about silicon because it is what we have in abundance. So this, the raw material is your sand. Okay, so you take the raw material from sand, make polysilicon nuggets purified from sand, make it crystal, then you have a silicon crystal ingot. And then if you look at this process, this is how the sand is made from This entire thing is there, and this crystal cooling is the CZ technology, what they say. And this particular thing requires very high temperatures. So overall, one can start from sand, make these nuggets, make a silicon crystal ingot. From that ingot, you can make silicon wafers. From the wafers, you can polish, do other things, and then start making your microelectronic circuit. Or you can also take a thing, make PN junction, and start working in terms of solar cell. So this is how a silicon wafer is done. The problem is this: the first step is to refine quartz or the sand into metallurgical grade silicon, employing giant furnaces, and keeping them hot takes a lot of energy. Okay, so the point is, in order to generate energy out of silicon solar cell, okay, silicon solar cell is something which is generating, harnessing solar light. One needs to put in lot of energy to make it. Secondly, the metallurgical grade silicon is then processed into purer form of polysilicon. This is the point here, polysilicon, along with a very toxic liquid called silicon tetrachloride as a byproduct. And if this byproduct is dumped without further treatment, the silicon tetrachloride reacts with water, releasing hydrochloric acid, acidifying the soil and emitting harmful fumes. In fact, this particular picture is taken from a factory in China where they are dumping the raw material directly into the water. Okay, if you look at this particular website, svtc.org, you will get to know all about this. Okay, and so there is inherent problems in making a silicon. First thing is, it takes lot of energy. You need to really heat a lot in order to get these things. Secondly, the way the process is done, it leads to a lot of toxic output. In addition, the extremely potent greenhouse gases like sulfur hexafluoride is used to clean the reactors used in silicon production. Okay, it is limited by huge fabrication costs, as the silicon processing is very expensive, involving very high temperature methods that leave a large carbon footprint. Okay, so these are the main issues with silicon. In the previous slide, I talked about how good it is. In this slide, I'm saying what are the problems with it. So the problem with silicon solar cell is not with the efficiency. We are okay with it, but then the way this particular technology is made, the manufacturing technology, gives a lot of problems. Okay, then comes the important point of environmental impact. How green is solar energy? Keep in mind, my first slide is about sustainable development. So when we say we want to solve the energy issues by finding an alternative to fossil fuel, we need to also think about our waste should be good enough that it should not affect the environment. However, as I showed you in the previous slide, it does have strong effect in the environment. Okay, so if you look at this particular this here, I gave you the URL for it. So there is a beautiful article written on solar energy isn't always as green as you think. Okay, so in this article, we get to know that the carbon footprint released by various solar cell developing countries, China, Europe are the most useful one, are the most forefront one in terms of developing silicon solar cells. If you look at it, the carbon footprint is growing. Okay, it's very high for single crystal, monocrystal, as well as silicon. So overall, we get to know that solar cell is good, but it does come with a big environmental price tag. Okay, therefore, this provides motivation of my talk, the requirement of alternative energy conversion technologies that are eco-friendly and cheaper. Now, let me stop here and say that it is not always that alternate energy is important. Once, for some applications, we need high quality, high efficient solar cell. For some applications, we don't need it. So it is important that we put aside our priorities and see what kind of solar cell should we invest on. Okay, yeah. So this is a graph of NREL taken from National Renewable Energy Limited Laboratory from USA. So this NREL always publishes latest numbers which one can get in different types of solar cells. and this number keeps pushing up every 6 months. Okay, so right now the best solar cell gives you a performance of 47.1%, meaning 100 photons. When 100 photons are incident on a solar cell, 47.1%, which is approximately 47 electrons come out of it. So this is the highest efficient, best efficient solar cell, and this comes from this so-called 4-junction or more solar cells. This is the concentrator, used concentrator. And where do we need this kind of things? If you look at it, there are those in pink which talk about silicon and silicon-based solar cells, or high efficient solar cells using silicon as well as something else. Okay. Now, all these things are very, very good. With good comes high cost. Gallium arsenide is one of the highest, most expensive semiconductor. Similarly, for crystalline silicon solar cells, you do start having single crystal ones, which I just explained to you. The best being 27.1%, sorry, 26.7% for the single crystal. Okay, so all the inorganic technologies, what we mentioned, are somehow good. Why it is good, I would just explain in briefly. The point is, the charge transport is way good, way better than the other parts, other kinds of solar cells, because inorganic systems are supposed to be highly crystalline. When you have highly crystalline materials, okay, the flow of electrons is much faster. The mobilities are very high, right? So the point which I want to emphasize here is that we do have solar cells of various types. Okay, we do have the best solar cells. We also have the mid-range solar cells, and right now the emerging photovoltaic is what we have based on the organic solar cells. Okay, now if you look at it, the colors, this entire thing talks about the first generation solar cell. Okay, silicon based. The multi-junction is something which has been evolved over the period, so I won't put it whether the first generation, second generation. They are the ones which are going on and on. The thin film technology, what you see in the green, are the second generation solar cells. Okay, and the third one is the emerging PV. Now, if you look at it, the question might come, why do we have to invest in this emerging PV even though the numbers are so low? Also, when we know these things are performing better, why the hell we need to do it? So this is the part of the discussion which we go in the further part of the talk. Yeah. There are so many approaches to make photovoltaic cells, and experts do not agree which one is the best. You can have the CPV or the concentrated photovoltaics, you have thin films, crystalline silicon. The point is simple. Something would help us the market, sometimes have strong impact on the material we use, and sometimes some kind of things help decide what kind of structure we use. Okay, so depending upon the market trend, CPV is something which is most used. CPV is the concentrated photovoltaic. As you see here, this is a bent curved antenna like thing what you see. So all the sunlight is focused in this point, and here is the solar cell which gives you that kind of high efficiency. Similarly, if you look at this, these are all micro lenses which are fitted in terms of the pixels, and the solar cell is behind it. Okay, now when it comes to thin film, there is requirement of flexible electronics, okay, flexible solar cells, and CIGS come out to be a good alternative for this, and so on. So you have CIGS, you have organic, multicrystalline, monocrystalline. So there are a lot of approaches. Again, as I said, depending upon the requirement, you choose what you want. You don't want to send these guys to the space when you launch a rocket, because you want something which you trust, and that's where this multi-junction solar cell comes. In fact, the solar cell which is used in the space is the 3-junction solar cell, non-concentrator, which has the best efficiency of 37.9%, but routinely made about 30%. So 30% solar cells is what is used by ISRO. Even our ISRO gets this 3-junction solar cells, tandem solar cells which you call, and send it out, which is 30% each. Okay, now comes the second and third generation. I just introduced you already. These are the CAGS, cadmium telluride, etc. The point is they can give you about 10 to 15% conversion efficiency. The device design allows you to minimum materials. They can be, one can evaporate it. You can do CVD to make these things. The problem is again expensive manufacturing equipment and toxic materials. Cadmium, tellurium, selenium. These are all the toxic ones which we do not want to dump in the environment. So they come with environment tag. Then comes the third generation, which are low cost. They do not have efficiency, but they are more clean in terms of the environment impact. In fact, towards the end of the talk, I would stress on this next generation, which is upcoming. This guy has started 10 years back. Okay, new kid of the block, but the efficiencies have gone to 35-25%, and now organic solar cells, so the third generation, is giving a run to the most established first and second generation solar cells. However, there are some issues with it. We'll just talk about it. Okay, so the point is simple. You choose the solar cell which helps you the best. You do not want to use a solar cell in the region where you really do not want to use it. Okay, so the requirement of silicon and other things are there, but you choose based on your requirement. Based on the availability, and so that you don't really invest lot of efforts in manufacturing those solar cells which are having heavy environment impact. And so comes this statement: for a PV technology to satisfy the sustainable criteria, it should be economical, made from earth abundant resources, along with lowest environmental impact. Okay, again, this comes on the sustainable point. Lowest environmental impact is something which people are thinking a lot. Okay, when you want to solve a problem, you will solve. It's very common with our physics. Take a body. If you sit on a photon, can we sit on a photon? That's how we write in the problems, right? Take Resnick-Haldane. That's how the questions are. But then that's how physics start. We develop from that. However, when it comes to the technology, one needs to get more realistic. And in the realistic life, it requires development of PV technology which is sustainable. Okay, hence the organic solar cells. Now, why work on emerging OPV? Why work on emerging OPV? The answer is this: you have various possibilities once you work on this. I just explain you here. Here, these two are the kind of large area solar cells. If you look at it, they're transparent, colorful. Okay, interesting. You have the option of printing them, as you see here. So just like how you print your newspaper, you can print your solar cell. Okay, you can print solar cells. So you can have roll-to-roll processing. When you have roll-to-roll processing, then why is it newspaper so cheap? Because it is easy to make newspaper. It's easy to print newspaper. The idea is the same. You print your solar cells, like how, and though there is a lot of trust on printed electronics. Okay, and if you see this guy's taken a printed solar cell on his tool, and he goes to some far off location. Maybe he's playing somewhere. He can sit on this as well as he can charge his mobile on that. Okay, so this is the kind of things we talk about it. And then here are the examples of applications of dye-sensitive solar cells, where I would like to stress on this concept of BIPV, which is building integrated photovoltaics, where you can replace your glass windows with a solar cell. Okay, so those kind of solar cells are not expected to have high efficiency, 1%, 0.5%, but then instead of they being passive, they're able to generate enough electricity to make your bulb put on. Okay, so this is the ideas which are being implemented in future, which is going to be implemented, and this BIPV is coming very, very strong. This is the future of solar cells, especially the organic solar cells. Okay, now as I talked about other things, these are the main aspects of why organic photovoltaics are very important. Organic molecule based solar cell based energy conversion devices have gained lot of interest as an attractive alternative owing to possibility of low cost fabrication procedures, ability to print them on flexible substrates, engineering at molecular level. Okay, once you talk about organic systems, one can use organic chemistry to do the way you want it. Okay, all the organic chemistry folks would agree with me that you can create whatever you like. So this is the point about it. So you can tune your bond gap, improve the charge transport characteristics, make it potentially less hostile environment bearing. There is again the basic and the idea behind this potentially less hostile environment bearing is to do with the growth of green chemistry. One can pick up materials which do not really pollute the surroundings. So these are the various possibilities that organic solar cells can offer. In addition, this device includes technologies like organic polymer solar cells, dye-sensitive solar cells, hybrid solar cells, which can be both perovskite solar cell and quantum dot. So when you say hybrid, it is a mix of organic inorganic systems. Okay, so this is the point which talk about it. Aesthetic factors are there, no vacuum processes, low temperature process, low material consumption. So overall, all these things give us a good way for a sustainable way of making a solar cell. Okay, again, I show the same thing with only that which is specific to this OPVs. Okay, if you look at it, the first OPV is the dye-sensitized solar cell, which started in 1992. Okay, this is a science paper here, and this guy has more or less remained stable almost. The best is about 12.3% efficiency. Okay, then comes the red dot, which is organic solar cells, various types, mainly the polymer solar cells, small molecule solar cells. Okay, and it is growing steadily, with the best being 17.4% efficiency. Then comes the quantum dot solar cells. Again, it started very late. It started sometime around 2010, and then we have more or less saturated about 16.6% efficiency. This is the best one can think about it. It still grows up, but there is a problem with all these things. The problem is people have stopped working about all this high impact ones, and they shifted to this new kid of the block, which is this red dot with yellow filling, okay, shading, which is the perovskite solar cell. Perovskite solar cell started sometime around 2013. This is the point. And then it right away came with 13% efficiency. And now the best efficient solar cell is 25.6.2%. Okay, so this is the latest trends which is there. This is the latest figure I'm showing you. 25.2% is the world record efficiency that a perovskite solar cell is able to do it. Now, to make it more marketable, people are putting perovskite solar cell with silicon solar cell, and they call it as perovskite silicon tandem, which is this. And with perovskite silicon tandem, people have crossed 20%, 29%. And the, if not of COVID, I know the group in Oxford was ready to show 31% efficiency. Okay, so that would grow up, and the idea is to beat the inorganic systems. Okay, now when we are doing so good, what is the problem with it? We'll come to it soon. Okay, one main difference between the solar cells which I talked earlier to what we are talking now is these are also called the excitonic solar cells, and the reason for it is the way the excitons are generated in inorganic and organic. Okay, so here the excitons in inorganic semiconductors, they are called the so-called Wannier Mott excitons. They have binding energy which is about 10 milli-electron volt, radius 100 angstroms, which is very, very big. So they are delocalized over long period of time, long space, sorry, or long region, domain space. And so it is easy to dissociate the electron hole pair. That's what I talked about the VBI, right? Earlier, remember, I talked about the built-in potential, and this built-in potential is sufficient to break open the binding energy, so electrons and hole can go to the respective pairs. The problem is different with organic semiconductors. The organic semiconductors, by being highly disordered, the excitons which are generated, what is an exciton? Sorry, I should tell you that exciton is the electron hole pair formed when light is absorbed by the material. Okay, electron gets excited to an energy level and leaving behind a hole. So this hole and the electron are coulombically bound by the so-called binding energy, exciton binding energy, which is this. And so one needs to give an extra energy so that the electron hole pairs are dissociated. So this is the idea about this Frenkel exciton. And Frenkel excitons are supposed to be very high, of the order of 1 electron volt. The radius is 10 angstroms, meaning they are not so delocalized. They are close to each other, again, by simple electrostatic principles. Okay, force, electrostatic force is inversely proportional to r square, and so the higher the radius or the lower the radius, higher is the binding energy. And so the organic semiconductors require a lot of external energy in order to dissociate, and this is the reason why organic semiconductors cannot work the way organic solar cells based on organic semiconductors cannot work the way inorganic systems can work. Okay, that's the point about it. And how you generate, how you give that extra energy to break upon, talks about the types of solar cells which are there. The first being dye-sensitized solar cells. Dye-sensitized solar cells, is, by definition, is something like you have a solar cell which is sensitized by the dye. So this consists of three components: a dye which is adsorbed onto a semiconducting system which is titanium. This titanium is a mesoporous thing. Mesoporous is nothing but your a spongy kind of material. Okay, so a dye is coating on TiO2. So the idea of a dye is it takes the light, absorbs the light, gets excited, and the energy levels are such that the electron is injected into the titanium. Electron is injected into the titanium. Now this titanium, being an inorganic semiconductor, can allow a faster transport of energy of the electron, and so this electron gets transported quickly to the electrode. Okay, now this is anode. So it gets quickly goes to the anode, and so once electron reaches there, it starts going to the circuit. Now this dye, which has lost its electron, is oxidized. Okay, it's oxidized, so it doesn't have an electron to inject. So where does it get the next electron in order to do the further process? It looks to take electrons from the surroundings, and that is obtained by the third part of the solar cell, which is the liquid electrolyte based on the redox iodide system or various other things. And this redox iodide, I3, 3I minus and I3 minus, has the potential of giving an extra electron to the dye. So the dye which is oxidized takes the electron from the closest electrolyte molecule, and then this guy starts going. So the hole which is injected from the dye to the electrolyte gets replenished by the electrons which come in this direction. And so if you look at this, electron is generated, injected, and then flows like this, eventually reaches its end. So overall, the circuit is completed, giving us the one cycle of solar cell performance. And so this solar cell would work as long as the dye can replenish. It can work as long as the electrolyte can help the dye to replenish the electrons. Okay, so this is the energetic with it. The point about organic solar cells is we don't talk about conduction band and valency band. We talk about HOMO-LUMO levels. HOMO is highest occupied molecular orbital. LUMO is lowest unoccupied molecular orbital. And so if you look at it, the injection can happen only when the LUMO of the dye is above the conduction band of the titanium. Okay, so this delta E, which I'm talking about, the difference between the LUMO and the conduction band, drives the electron injection. I will not go into details about it. If anyone is interested, we can just have a chat later. So this particular energy injection, energetics help the formation of the charge injection. Okay. Then comes the stability issue. As I said, all of us who know water, who are now getting drenched in water in rain, know that whatever you do, you're going to get wet if you go out. You may wear your raincoat, you may put your umbrella, do whatever, you're going to get wet, because that is the property of the liquid. And this is true with the liquid-based DSSC, right? The electrolyte is something which starts the problem. Okay, so there is a lot of stability test which has gone out, and then the main issues have come with the way the electrolyte starts behaving. There is a regeneration issue, there is a product decomposition issue, there is injection issues. All the things are there which starts the problem without that. Okay, so that I'm going to tell next. So here we are trying to say that the sensitizers employed in DSC can sustain 20 years of outdoor service without significant degradation, but you do have issues with the liquid electrolyte. Okay, which is the reason why people stop really bothering about DSSC. The efficiency reached is 12.3%. It's a science small paper. All good. The problem lies with the commercialization. This is because of the liquid electrolyte. The stability issues because of the evaporation and leakage of the liquid. Okay, so this liquid the iodide system is very corrosive, and it degrades the molecule. And then comes the solid state DSSC, where you replace the liquid electrolyte with an organic system which is used as a whole transport material. The point is the same. You have electron transport layer, which is the organic semiconductor system. You use dyes, which is not ruthenium based but something else, but still the organic dye is acting as a light antenna. The important point is the whole transporter is different. It is not liquid, but a molecular hole transport based on spirometry, and people have replaced it with even polymer as hole transport. Overall, the point is the liquid is replaced with something which is more solid. Okay, the idea is the same here. It gets excited, injects, and the hole transport is what is taking the electrolyte, and overall the system works. The problem is, so the important point is again the donor acceptor interface. Okay, the main difference between liquid electrolyte and liquid DSSC and the solid state DSSC is the thickness. Liquid can penetrate through small holes. That's what we know from our sponge. If you go to kitchen, you have the sponge, and water can absorb into the sponge much faster. Okay, but then if you replace that with a fluidic system with more viscosity, they would not really go deep. It's called the porosity issues. Okay, so liquid DSSC can give you a thickness of 10 microns. So higher the thickness, more the dye absorbed, and so higher is the efficiency. When it comes to DSSC, the ruthenium based complexes which were used earlier were the most suitable. The idea behind ruthenium complexes is they have very good energetics to inject electrons. In fact, the electron injection happens within 100 femtoseconds, very fast. Okay, and so ruthenium complexes were used. But the problem with ruthenium complexes is they have low excitation coefficient, meaning they absorb little, but the amount of dye which one can load with the 10 micron thickness allows you to have sufficient absorption for your solar cell application. The solid state DSSC, as I said, the thickness has to be small because the hole transport material when it is in liquid form is highly viscous and it cannot really penetrate into it, and therefore the thickness is made small. And in order to come over this issue of low excitation coefficient, people started working on high excitation coefficient of dye, and more molecules with strong push-pull character gained importance. So these molecules which are used in solid state DSSC has been really are made to absorb a lot. Okay, so all the organic chemists found a lot of reason to get excited about this, because with one can generate a lot of new dyes with which can absorb a lot, as well as the push-pull character is what gives you the dielectric issues. Okay, it has its own charge transfer characteristics. It can inject more efficiently. So overall, the opportunities of opportunities available for using for organic chemists mainly is to make these molecules, and people have been doing a lot of good work in this direction. Then comes the quantum dot solar cells. Quantum dot sensitive solar cells is similar to what we just discussed, just that we replace the dye with quantum dots. Okay, semiconducting quantum dots like cadmium sulfide, cadmium selenide, the mix of this, and so on, indium sulfide, indium selenide, and so on. Okay, so the story remains the same. It has started earlier, but then just like how the electrolyte issues have come, the same problems happen even in the QDSCC, and that's where the technology stopped with the best efficiency of around 16%. Then comes the polymer solar cells, which offers your possibility of printing electronics, printable materials. The reason is simple: the way the solar cell behaves. Okay, unlike the case in DSSC and quantum dot, where one needed to have a titania, which is semiconductor inorganic system, this is replaced by another organic material for polymer solar cells. By definition, it is a bicontinuous network of donor acceptor organic blend. Okay, where the donor is typically a semiconducting polymer, acceptor is about a fullerene based or non-fullerene system. What is happening here is this: you have a bicontinuous network. You have domain of polymer and acceptor. PTS is a polymer example. PCBM is an acceptor. So the light is absorbed by the polymer, which is a harvester. Upon absorption, you have the exciton generation, which is a Frenkel exciton, which is very strongly bound, and they do not dissociate by themselves. So once it is born, it doesn't know what to do, it just goes around, which we call as diffusion, and exciton keeps diffusing, going around till reaches the donor acceptor plane. So the diffusion, so the dissociation can happen at exactly this interface because the interface allows, there is energetic difference between the donor and acceptor interface, which gives you the extra energy to dissociate the exciton. So exciton dissociates, right? Electron goes into this polymer side, hole gets injected into in the acceptor side, and then they transport along their continuous network, right? This is the idea about this bicontinuous network. So you have the charge transport. Overall, you have the solar cell. That's the idea behind the polymer solar cell. Advantage: it's very cheap. It allows you roll-to-roll processing, printing. Okay, environmental friendly materials can be used. One can deposit your solar cell on a bag. You can make on transparent substrates like this. You can make it different colors depending upon your organic system. The colors can change. Now girls can come and ask in shops, please give me the solar cell of my favorite color, right? Sorry for being stereotyped, but it's just a joke. Okay, and then you can also have various printed different types of printing electrons. Okay, so all these things are possible. Can be semi-transparent or aesthetically pleasing, ultra flexible or even stretchable, lightweight. You can have, and importantly, because they're absorbing strongly, one can have low light conditions. So even if there is a lot of cloud, the amount of light that diffuses through the cloud, it is sufficient. And then you have this all beautiful color durability. The evolution of acrylic is not as intuitive as one thought. Okay, you had this organic electronic material. People started trying with organic electronic material. It didn't work. Then they used the electron donor acceptor. In this, when they did this, they found the problem with pentyl exciton. The efficiency was 0.1%. Then they moved to this technology, this particular thing where they use a bilayer of donor acceptor. The efficiency was good, 1%, much better than this. However, people realized that the problem is the extent of the interface. So they went to this bulk heterojunction solar cells where the bulk heterojunction gives you the intermixing of all these things, and efficiency has grown from beyond 10%. Now the efficiency is 17%. It's the kind of world record which is there. Why it is so interesting is the construction is very, very simple. Okay, you have a transparent electrode as typically this transparent electrode is FTO or indium titanium oxide, ITO. Okay, as a transparent material. The whole transport layer is the standard dye, which is the polymer which you use. Okay, it acts as a protolite, and also one can use the lithium fluoride as a cathode buffer layer. Overall, one can make these two, put all these things and get various solar cells. Okay, to make the active layer, it is much easier. You have a donor solution, you have an acceptor solution. You mix them, stir it overnight. Your active material is ready. Once you stir it, they are ready. You spin coat them. Just by spin coat deposition, you can deposit, and because they are mixed overnight, they nicely blend into their own forms. So donor acceptor just mix into this, and when you deposit, they find their own pathways. Of course, you have a lot of discontinuities, and that's where the main issue comes. The energy level band diagram tells you what is the main importance of having the interface. Okay, so here the is again the PCB BCBM I just maintained so that you understand what it is. The LUMO of the polymer is much higher than the LUMO of the acceptor. Okay, so this is how the interfaces are there, and so when the exciton which is here, hold down on our electron hole pair, comes to in contact with the PCBM interface, it sees a big change in the HOMO-LUMO picture, LUMO levels, and that difference between these two LUMO levels gives the energy for the dissociation. Right? That's how the exciton dissociation happens in organic solar cells. What are the limitations of this? As I said earlier, the bicontinuous network is not always that happens. Okay, so the diffusion of exciton to interface and charge separation, these two are the main mechanisms which really limits the formation of the generation of charges. Okay, because it can happen that the domain size may be big and the excitons which are generated, electron hole pair, may keep on going around, but they don't reach an interface. Okay, so it's a probability which happens, and sometimes it's probable there's a possibility that it doesn't reach the interface, and so there is loss of photons which are absorbed by the material. Then comes the all important problem, which is morphology. As I said, when you deposit, when you spin coat it, you expect a bicontinuous network. It is not always the case. It can happen that the electron is injected into a network of acceptor which really doesn't need the reach the electrode, and so it can have some point where it just stops and it doesn't reach. So you have limitations from the exciton generation, sorry, charge generation stage, as well as the charge transport, charge collection. So overall, all these things have formed a limited the efficiencies of organic solar cells, but the least limitation is overcome with the cost factor. Even though you have low efficient solar cell, it is cheap. It is just like how we are all used to taking a plastic bags to the shop instead of our age-old, jute or cotton bags. Even the shopkeepers don't give you jute or cotton bags; they give you plastic bags. Why? Because plastic is cheap. The same thing is here. Plastic is cheap. Polymers, plastic is nothing but your polymers, and so the same story holds here, true here. Polymers are supposed to be cheap, and so one can make cheap solar cells. Now, what are the future about this? This is the point about it. You have various possibilities to go. You have the donors which can have polymers, small molecules, metal-free dyes. The acceptors can be fullerene derivatives, non-fullerene derivatives. Of course, all this which I'm presenting would feel like it excitement to the organic chemists, but then to make a device out of it, you need you need both physicists as well as electrical engineers, okay, and the mechanical engineers. So it is important that all the branches of science and technology come together to make this organic solar cells a success story. Okay, the thing. Okay, now the advantages of small molecules or polymers is simple. Small molecule donors can have well-defined molecular structure, okay, definite molecular weight, high purity without batch to batch variation, easy to tune the solubility and Doppler lettering properties by suitable chemistry. The point is again similar to what we have in the pharma industry. One can make paracetamol day in day out for last so many years because the protocol is defined, and you can make the protocol, give it the protocol to chemical engineer, okay, and chemical engineer would make it industrial, and you can have industrial batch to batch variation. Without any batch to batch variation, you can keep on manufacturing or keep on producing the same material. So that is true with small molecules. However, with polymer, the chemical reactions are not so easy, and so you might have batch to batch variation. So I can buy a bottle of polymer now, make a solar cell of 10% efficiency. I buy the same bottle after 6 months. That particular polymer may not give me the 10% efficiency. This is the idea about the batch to batch variation. Okay. In addition to the consistency in the synthesis of small molecules, they also tend to exhibit high hole and electron mobility than polymer counterparts due to large range order. Polymers are supposed to be extending. Okay, they have long chain length, and so this long chain length would lead to a lot of disorder in the system. Also, the polymers are expected to have good synthesis hassle-free protocols, okay, and one can look at the roll-to-roll printing. Again, the idea about roll-to-roll printing is to make inks, okay, just like how we have ink in the pen or ink in your printer. You make the solution of these polymers or solution of the small molecules, solution of the acceptors, okay, and then keep printing it out. The same story. That's how you have the roll-to-roll process. Okay, this is a design criteria. I would just skip this because it's not part of this audience. I'll just skip this part. Then comes the idea of fullerene acceptors. Long back, when the first solar cell have come, they used the fullerene C60. C60 seems to be a most useful semiconductor because of its nice symmetry, and so the electron acceptor capability increases with this symmetry. That's the idea behind the fullerene acceptors. And so people started working on various derivatives of these fullerene molecules, and the efficiencies kept on growing. For example, this 71 BM, E71 BM gives you 10.8%. This is about C71B, 70 BM 6.8, and so on. And there is lot of molecular engineering approach to make better fullerene based acceptors. Okay, I just explained you a few things. Importantly here, as I said, it's not just injection. There's also something called the voltage which generates, and the difference between the HOMO of the acceptor, HOMO of the donor and the LUMO of the acceptor gives you the idea behind the overall voltage which can generate in the solar cell, and that one can tune by tuning the band gap of this acceptor. So all these things helps us to make more and more better solar cells. Okay, but then the story is not same. People have worked on fullerene acceptors still from the beginning, like it started from 1995 onwards, and it has gone on till 2019, 2010, 2012. Then it reached a stage where nothing better was going on. Beyond 10.8%, no one was able to make it better. Okay, so people started thinking how best to come over the issues with fullerene. Okay, then they started talking about what are the problems with fullerene molecules. So these are the basic problems. You have the poor absorption, limited energetics, high cost, bit unstable. So all these things started affecting the benefit of fullerene molecules, and people started looking at what are the new ways to make more and more efficient organic solar cells. And that's where the concept of non-fullerene based acceptors came. Okay, so with non-fullerene acceptors, you can have tunable energy levels, low cost, cheaper devices, better stability over long time, more photons to more 4 electrons. The idea is that till fullerene based were the only available acceptor, all had to work only with this buckyball C60. You take the C60, do whatever you can, and try to get the acceptor. The moment this requirement was broken, the mold is broken. And so people started, the researchers started really looking at various newer types of molecules which can be acceptor systems. And so this field of organic solar cells got rejuvenated again. Okay, so I can say without any hesitation that the field was almost dying till by the time 2015, 2016, where the perovskite solar cell business have come up very high. Around 2016, few groups started making good non-fullerene acceptors, and so now from 10%, 12% people, the researchers could make close to 17%. So that is the idea behind this requirement of non-fullerene based acceptors. So 17.1% efficient single junction solar cell is possible now. This is this latest paper in 2020. Okay, and these are the kind of molecules which use this is the fullerene acceptor and this is the non-fullerene acceptor. So you started breaking the mold of buckyball into something which is much more bigger. Okay, now how to make much better? You can make interface engineering. Okay, this is the donor rich acceptor rich active layer which I just mentioned. You have the bicontinuous network of acceptor and donor. You can have this donor acceptor interface. Okay, metal contact which makes a solar cell. Then you may actually do a interlayer engineering so that you can have a hole selective layer or an electron selective layer that can help you much better. Okay, so this interlayer engineering is critical for improving efficient OPVs. It can tune the energy levels, define polarities of metal electrodes. So eventually it's metal anode or cathode. Depending upon the hole and the electron selective layers, you can make it as anode or cathode. Okay, you can reduce pressure, you can do what of various stability issues. All these things are possible with this interlayer engineering. And so everything which I just mentioned earlier, for example, this one. Okay, for example, this one required this BV, which is an interlayer. Okay, and so on. So interlayer interfacing is something which is most important. So these are the various organic materials library which I just introduced to you. Polymers, acceptors. I missed out the non-fullerene acceptor. You have the dyes and so on. Then comes the concept of hybrid solar cells. Hybrid solar cells talk about the possibility of generating, making a new type of solar cell where the problem of DSSC and the problem of organic solar cells are mitigated. How? The problem with DSSC is the liquid electrolyte, okay, but it has an acceptor system which is well defined. The problem with organic solar cells is the morphology because the donor acceptor interface need not be always bicontinuous. And so people thought that why not use the polymer from the organic solar cells, which is a electron donor as well as hole transporter as an active medium, and use the titania as that of a acceptor. Okay, Again, the answer is same. Polymer absorbs, injects electrons. Okay. In addition, it does the hole transport. Okay. Purposefully, I put the transport of hole very slow because this is much slower, and that's what makes the problem with the hybrid solar cells. This guy could not go beyond 3 to 4% because of these issues. Also, the polymer was found to be very bad at injecting into the titanium. And that system, that particular technology remained as it is till this beautiful guy came up, which is the perovskite solar cells. Perovskite solar cells follow the same procedure of DSSC, okay, or hybrid again, where the die is replaced by perovskites. This is the perovskite structure. If you look at it, ABX3, earlier people have explored a lot with organometal halide perovskite. So A is an organic system, typically methyl ammonium, formadium, etc. B is lead. Okay, then started because lead is contaminating. People have replaced lead with tin and other things. And X3 is typically the halide. Okay, it's not oxygen like what we have in ferroelectric systems. It is a halide system. Okay, so ABX3 is what is the perovskite, and people have found that this perovskite started giving tremendously high efficient solar cells, and it's a fantastic material. Okay, so it is so fantastic that it's not just solar cells. People started, the researchers started finding out various other applications like lighting applications. I just explain you a few things. You have solar cell which has grown more than 20.5% efficiency. It is found to have strong emitting light emission, so one can use it for light emitting applications. One can make laser with it. This is the new results which have come. I mean, yesterday there was a paper from IIT Madras group where not yesterday, last week, where they found water splitting. Okay, you can use water splitting from light from solar. It's called photoelectric conversion, so PEC. And so this water splitting can generate hydrogen as fuel as well as current. Okay, so these are all possible with perovskites. Apart from that, this guy found applications in photodetectors, FETs, LEDs, electroluminescence, PEC, LEDs, a lot of things. Okay, so I invite you to look at this paper on Journal of Material Chemistry C in 2016, where a lot of other applications are discussed very well. Okay, now why it is so interesting is again the way it is made. It is very cheap. You take methyl ammonium iodide. In this example, I just give a schematic of how to make methyl ammonium iodide, lead iodide perovskite solar cell. So this lithium ammonium iodide is a material which you can buy from shop. Lead iodide is something which you can metal from shop. Okay, you take these two, make solutions, mix them, spin coat it, heat it. You spin coat it on TiO2, then you heat it to about 120 to 130 degrees centigrade. You have this brown perovskite forming, and that's your active layer. You deposit spirometate, which is the hole transport material which you used in the solid state DSSC, and you can make your solar cell just like how you made your solid state DSSC. So everything remains the same. This is a mix of solid state DSSC hybrid solar cells, and so it is the it's the latest thing which people could come out of it. I'm running out of words, sorry. Okay, so it being so simple and easy to make, the efficiencies are so high, and so everyone started working on it. So much so that all those guys who are working on other solar cell were simply moving into this direction, and they did move into this direction till the non-Fullerene acceptors came. Answer is again here the same thing which is there. Energetics. LUMO is supposed to be higher than acceptor of TiO2. You injection, then you have this pyrometer which acts as a hole transport material, and overall you have the best solar cell system which is possible with organic materials. Okay, now why it is so good is the crystallinity. As I said earlier, the main difference between inorganic and organic is the order parameter. Inorganic are supposed to be very ordered compared to organic systems, and this perovskites, by virtue of it being, this material, by virtue of having a perovskite structure, has a strong lattice parameter and also strong range order. Okay, a lattice order, and so it was found that the material is very crystalline once it is heated to 100 degrees centigrade. Okay, and because of that, once the exciton is generated, electron hole pair is generated, it can keep on moving till it reaches the interface. So the carrier diffusion length is found to be as high as 1 micron compared to what we have in organic solar cells. I didn't tell you there. In organic solar cells, the hybrid solar cell uh, is about how much? 10 to 20 nanometers. Okay. Whereas here it is can go to 1 micron. So till 1 micron, if the electron hole pair is generated, it can keep on going without getting recombined. Okay. And therefore, where is it useful? It is useful because you can make a thick active layer. By making a thick active layer, you can actually increase the light absorption. By increasing the light absorption, you can increase the number of electron hole pairs formed, and so you can increase the overall current in the solar cell. And that's why you have a very good solar cell material with in perovskites. Okay, this is the idea about behind this carrier diffusion length. Okay, so this helped us in getting the best of both worlds. It has been agreed that inorganic hybrid nature is what makes it so successful. The organic component renders good solubility of the perovskites and facilitates self-assembly, effectively enabling its participation, deposition from solution. The organic component produces an extended network by covalent or inorganic interactions, and so it allows possibility of good crystalline nature in deposit films. And so it is beautiful. But then all that glitters is not gold, and there is a strong stability issue which people figured out. The first being the so-called hysteresis in JV curve. Okay, this is the solar cell para studies which we do. So JV is the current density versus the voltage. Okay, so it was found that if you do the experiment of solar simulator in the solar simulator, the speed at which you change the current changes the way the JV curve behaves. And also, if you go from one end to other end, if you start from 0 and go to positive and come back, the JV curve doesn't retrace its path, but there is a strong hysteresis. Meaning to say that over the multiple cycles of solar simulation studies, the material is found to be degrading, and no one knew why. It straight away gave you a 12-13% efficiency upfront, but this hysteresis has started giving alarms. Okay, and people started working about why is it so. Main issue started coming up with because of moisture. Okay, so methyl ammonium iodide, or you take chloride or whatever, moment it comes in contact with water, it easily dissolves, okay, into methyl ammonium iodide and methyl ammonium iodide, sorry, and lead iodide. And also this methyl ammonium iodide which is formed can further dissociate into this and HI, and overall it gives you water which comes out, and also hydrogen gas. So basically what is happening is once the metal comes in contact with moisture, it doesn't remain as methyl ammonium lead iodide, but it breaks up into its constituents, because of which your perovskite doesn't remain like perovskite and there is no active material. You put it in water and it doesn't work like perovskite solar cell. So this is the main issue which people have figured out with stability, with moisture. Then comes the UV radiation. It was found that the TiO2 which was there is having a lot of deep lying unoccupied states, and upon UV radiation, the efficiency is coming down. And why UV radiation is important is if you look at the solar radiation, there is a lot of UV component to it already. Okay, and so this is a problem. Then comes the temperature. When you heat it up, it was found that when you heat it up, it was found that it again disintegrates. Further, in the presence of oxygen and ambient air, when you do these things in the main outside, okay, the perovskites are found to lose its nature. You see, this is the initial perovskite structure. With time, with oxygen and air, there is degradation of this film, because of which overall the solar cell was degrading. Okay, and then the humidity and aging effect. So even this was found to have a strong impact on the solar cell. It's not just water, temperature, etc. With time, it was found to reduce its performance. In few days, it has gone from 12.1 11 percentage to less than 4% in just 10 days. So you do not want to have a solar cell which degrades so fast. And that's where the new ideas come up. People started working on encapsulation, somehow make some encapsulation that would improve, that would not allow air, moisture, oxygen, etc. Then replace methyl ammonium with new other things like formaldinium, cesium, etc. Okay. Then the latest 2D perovskites have come where they used bulky alkyl spaces. The idea behind bulky alkyl spaces is these alkyl chains are known to be very hydrophobic, and then they keep extending themselves, they're dangling outside. So because they are very long and bulky, moisture doesn't enter and cannot affect the active layer. So this is the idea behind 2D perovskites. But then the point about this 2D perovskites is that you see this, it can sustain to a 2D level. Okay, 3D is a bulk. Okay, you can make a thick active layer. 2D perovskites cannot be made into the active layers because by definition they are supposed to be 2-dimensional. Okay, and so you see this is the active layer and this is the bulky chain which is there, and that would protect the other ones. Okay, and therefore 2D, even though they are supposed to be more stable by virtue of it not being allowing the water into it, it cannot have high efficiencies, and that's where the quasi 2D 3D perovskites have come. So what researchers started doing is they make 3D perovskites and they coat with 2D perovskites. So 2D perovskites would not let the water and air come into it. 3D perovskites is what gives you the good solar cell efficiencies, and that's where the technology is there, and that's where the latest high efficient solar cells are coming out of it. Quasi 2D perovskites. Okay, this is how it is. Now, they have taken close to 1.5–15 minutes of your time. So I would just stop my presentation with our latest result, where I would prove you why it is not difficult to make a a sustainable solar cell. Okay, so here in the last year we presented a paper on low cost green dye sensitized solar cell based on new fixin dye with aqueous electrolyte and platinum free counter electrode. Okay, so before I go to the next slide, I need to explain something more about this electrolyte and platinum based counter electrode in regular DSSC. Okay, in order to get the best electrolyte performance, they use platinum as a catalyst. The platinum is coated onto the electrode. Okay, and that's where the reaction takes place and the electron is quenched from the electrode into the liquid electrolyte. That's the idea behind a platinum counter electrode. Okay, now platinum by virtue of it is expensive, and so these counter electrodes are found to be very expensive. Then comes the problem with electrolyte. As I said earlier, the iodide based electrolytes are corrosive. So if you take water is not corrosive, and so lot of efforts were put in to make aqueous electrolyte based solar cells. It's called the aqueous dye sensitized solar cells. That is what is being researched upon last 6 to 7 years. Okay, and so we tried to replace the platinum with platinum free coated electrode. We tried to replace the iodine with aqueous electrolyte, and importantly, we found a dye which is very common in India. It's called the new fixin dye. This is the dye which gives the color, the red color to the kumkum. Okay, you mix this dye with turmeric and then you mill it, and what you get out is kumkum powder. Okay, so this is how it is done in most of the Andhra. Because I come from Andhra, this is how I got introduced to this dye. Okay, so we used these three components to make the solar cell, which is very cheap. Obviously, you remove platinum, it is like very inexpensive, and you remove iodine, it is much more inexpensive. And then this new fixin is very cheap, very abundant in India. I'll just come to it a little later. Okay, so this is the molecule which we used. This is the absorption. As you see, it has strong absorption in the visible region. It gives you the magenta color, strong magenta color. And we did the density functional theory, DFT calculations, to find out where the HOMO-LUMO picture is there. And we find that the LUMO is minus 3.46 electron volts, which is above the conduction band of TiO2, which is 4.2 electron volts. And so if you put this dye on TiO2, there is a possibility of electron injection, which is what we see with energetics. As you see here, possibility of electron injection. Okay, now in our work we replace the iodide with ferrous Fe3 plus Fe2 plus electrolyte in KCl solution. I'll come to it. And then we replace the platinum electrode with carbon fabric. Carbon fabric is the black cloth which one can buy very cheap. In fact, I bought it recently for 5,000 rupees. I got about 10 meters, very cheap. Okay, then we did some spectroscopic characterization. We did PL quenching studies, where we see that in the presence of TiO2, the luminescence is quenched, meaning all that gets excited gets all the when the dye gets excited. Okay, the idea behind luminescence quenching is all the molecules when they excite with the light, they get de-excited by emission of radiation. Right, this is the idea behind photoluminescence. So when you take nu fuchsin on glass and you excite, the emission is strong. The moment you put it on TiO2, the emission gets weakened. Why? Because the population of those molecules which get excited, instead of they recombining to the ground state, they inject into the electron. The electrons are injected into the TiO2, and that's why you see that less number of molecules, less number of population of electrons are there which de-excite into the ground state, and so the emission strength is reduced, and that is the idea behind emission quenching studies. And we see that the nu fuchsin upon TiO2 has very sharp, very low emission need compared to that of pure TiO2, pure and nu fuchsin. Then we did the time resolved studies, and we find that the lifetime of TiO2 emission of on TiO2 is much shorter. Okay, and then I haven't presented you this, but our work on transient absorption study spectroscopy showed that the electron injection is much faster, which is less than 2 picosecond. Okay, and overall, we believe that this dye is good enough to inject electron into the TiO2. Then we started making the solar cell. This is how it makes it. You take an FeO substrate, then you deposit TiO2 on it. Okay, and then you put dye on it. You rinse it and you absorb the nu fuchsin dye on the TiO2, and then you close it with the Fe2 plus Fe3 plus in KCl dye solution and close it with the counter electrode, which is the black counter electrode. Okay, so this is the black color is the carbon fabric. Overall, you have a very cheap solar cell. Okay, based on all these things. And then when we looked at the solar cell efficiency, it did well with I3, I minus. However, the efficiency is very little, 0.02%. Okay. Then you replaced with a sodium sulfide based electrode, which is again typically used in quantum solar cells, and that was much better, 0.2%. And then we replaced with something which we used for our work, which is Fe2 plus Fe3 plus to get the 2.88% efficiency. So overall, we started from 0.02 and went to 2.88% just by replacing the electrolyte. And so what we found is that these components are very cheap. A standard ruthenium based dye would cost you 31,000 per gram, whereas this nu fuchsin costs you 2.5 rupees. Okay, it's about 2 rupees per gram. Counter electrode carbon fabric, we measured it, we found it to be about 1 rupee per centimeter square compared to a platinum coated counter electrode, which is 300 rupees per centimeter square. The liquid electrolyte is very cheap and non-toxic. Overall, we proved that the electrolyte is water based and this device is functional in aqueous medium, and importantly, we have a low cost green aqueous DSSC. Okay, everything is, when I say green, everything is having very little environmental impact. Okay, and this work got a lot of publicity. I just showed you a few things. We have it published. Enado paper took it up on it. It is presented in Deccan Chronicle. A lot of papers picked it up, and then our group selected for this Planet Heaters article in Hindu. Okay, overall, people like this work because of this very cheap and environmental impact. Okay, so to summarize my talk, I have presented various technologies on organic solar cells with the theme of a technology towards development of low cost solar cell, green solar cell. I have explained to you what are the environmental impact on various first generation solar cell manufacturing technology. Okay, I explained to you what is organic solar cells, different types of organic solar cells, few strategies to improve efficiencies. Okay, and then we presented an example from our group, which is nu fuchsin based solar cell. So I hope I could convince you that it is not just sufficient to think about renewable energy, it is also important that the technology which we develop should have little environmental impact. This is how one can proceed towards sustainable development. I like to thank my funding agencies, various funding agencies from DST, or IIT Hyderabad, etc. All my collaborators, past and present, I keep collaborating. Most of my papers are multi-author paper, and my group members, without whom I would not be able to do any of the work. They are my hands, eyes, and legs, everything. I just give my brain to them. Okay, and this is my group website. Feel free to approach us for any queries. We do a lot of work. We do ultra-fast time result spectroscopy, nonlinear optics. We make organic solar cell devices. We also work on ferroelectric systems for multifunctional applications. Okay, these are various pictures from it. And I would like to thank you for your patience, and thank you for your invitation. Yeah. I'm done.
Dear participants, we request you, if you have any query, to message it over here so that you may ask the speaker of today with his and very interesting talk. Has explained everything regarding this solar cells. Requesting you, if you have any queries, please post over here.
Victor sir already pasted. You can go to live event question and answer session. Many questions pasted, sir. That participant is there. Beside that question and answer, live event is there. If you click that one, then published. If you click, you will get questions.
He is not here with me, sir. I think.
So can I ask?
Yeah, sir. You carry on, sir. You carry on, sir.
Okay, sir. So one question, sir, by participant. What is the prospect that solar cells from your lab will come into the market for production?
Yes, that's a very, very important question. I would say we are in talk with a couple of industries in Hyderabad, based on Hyderabad, okay, where they are ready to come up and help us in marketing our work. The problem with the new Fuxi solar cell, which we found, is it is also still struggling with stability issue. So we need to do a little bit of encapsulation, etc., to make more stable. And also we need to look at the large area picture of it. But yes, a couple of I forgot the names of the companies. They have approached me last year, and this year we wanted to start, but unfortunately due to COVID we could not do it. This is there. It is very much like.
Okay, sir. Okay. Thank you, sir. One more question from Dr. Logu Durei, that he is chemistry HOD, MITS College. Size of the solar cell to measure the efficiency is still debatable. Is there any standard for the size? Why few articles highlights the higher efficiency without following the standard size?
I would like to answer this question in two ways. Okay. The first is, it is true that many articles are not really telling out the sizes. The reason is, normally the way this organic solar cells is made, you make pixels. Okay? You take a large area substrate and you make pixels of 2 mm by 3 mm or 4 mm by 5 mm. Okay, and then you expose it to the solar simulator, which is light coming out of it. The right way of doing it is to put mask, meaning you should cover all other solar cells and just expose that particular pixel which you use for measuring your DAV curve. If you don't do it, what happens is that all the solar cells again connected to each other, they would start giving away its electron. They would start contributing to the overall current. Okay, so those articles which do not tell you that they used a mask. Look at the experimental experimental details. If they don't tell you that they used a mask, don't trust the data. Okay, so all the organic solar cells require you to do the mask, and that's where the point about I think there is a paper in 2014 specifically mentioned what is the right ethics to study organic solar cell parameters. Okay, it's an advanced materials paper. It's a very good paper very good journal, and people have really made it a point to say that it is important that you measure it properly by putting a mask. Next question is the size of it. Yes, the sizes are small. Again, it comes from the point of higher the size, higher is the resistance offered by the layer. Okay, so that would reduce the overall efficiency, and that's why all the record holding, all the record certified efficiencies, like let's say published in NREL, they need to have a certain standard size, and that standard size has to be followed in order to get it worldwide acceptance. Otherwise, it's confined to the paper. I hope I answered this question.
Okay, thank you, sir. So Dr. Jagdish Babu, he asked one question. Perovskite solar cells need high cost Spiro as HTM. What is the alternative for this?
At the moment, people are still working with pyroemitted. There are few alternatives which have come up, but then they're not efficient. At the moment, the perovskite solar cell community is really not worried about the cost, because unlike the organic solar cells or DSSC, the efficiencies are much higher. It is competing with the silicon. Okay, so the problem to attack now in perovskite solar cell business is the stability issue. Once the stability issue is attacked, then the cost issues will be attacked. Right now, it is still a challenge to bring this perovskite solar cells outside the glow box. Okay, so it would work fantastic as long as it is in a controlled environment. You bring it out, it is going to go bad. Okay, so I would still say serious replacements of pyroemitted is not there. You do still find some papers, like for example, there is a paper on porphyrins which have come up, phthalocyanins which have come up. There are papers which show that alternate form of whole transport material, but pyroemitted is most accepted. Okay, that's where I would say I would like to be more diplomatic in this point. A lot of work is not concentrated on the replacement of pyro. Most of the work is really put into come out of the stability issues. Yeah.
Okay, sir. And one more question by Dr. Jagdish Babu. How one can overcome stability issues in organic solar cell?
Encapsulation is the right answer. You encapsulate with so when normally what people do is they make the solar cell in glow box and they put glass substrates on top and put epoxy around it so that the water or oxygen doesn't get in. And also there is a usage of the so-called oxygen getters. So these are the materials which absorb oxygen. Okay, so these oxygen getters are used as a small interlayer. They're supposed to be very transparent material in layer. They just use a very thin layer to it so that the oxygen is absorbed before they enter into the active layer. So at the moment, encapsulation is the only good way of avoiding the moisture and other stability issues.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. One anonymous participant, he asked, what is the maximum efficiency you have reported so far from your lab?
From my lab, to be very honest, this is the paper which I got 2.1%, because I never really worked on highly efficient solar cell. But I was part of various collaborative works where the efficiency is more than 10% was reported. So yeah, my job is not to really go about making high efficient solar cells.
Okay, sir. Thanks, sir. One more question by participant. How disorder affects exciton binding energy in organic material?
Disorder doesn't affect exciton binding energy. Exciton binding energy is intrinsic property of the material. Okay, the disorder affects in the dissociation. Okay, if it is ordered, then the excitons can freely move around and reach the interface. If it is disordered, then what is disorder? What is order? It is the energetic difference. If you take the energetic landscape around the exciton, how free it can move around energetically, because this is the energetic thermodynamic way of going around the landscape. Okay, so when it is disordered, it is like a lot of hilly area. When you say hilly area, the peaks and the valleys are the energy changes which is there around in the space, and so the higher the disorder, the higher the possibility of traps or the valleys of the energy where the exciton can get trapped. Once it is trapped, it cannot come out of it and move around to get dissociated. The point is this: when I say exciton diffusion length, what I mean by it? What I mean by it is very simple. The length the exciton can travel before it recombines. What is an exciton? Electron hole pair. This is formed because a photon is absorbed by the material and the electron is excited. So the exciton lifetime is how long this electron hole pair can be separated with itself before they recombine. How do they recombine? They recombine by emitting a photon. Okay, that's how you study the PL studies, right? Photon emission studies. So you want the excitons to dissociate before they combine, before they recombine. And so this guy has certain lifetime, which is about few nanoseconds. So they can go around the area till few nanoseconds before which they recombine. If they fall into a trap, they would recombine without going around. If they're too far away from the donor accept interface, they would keep on going before they come down. And so the binding energy is not really relevant for this discussion. It is the diffusion length which is very relevant. And so this is the point. This is the answer. The disorder is very impacts is a very serious issue when it comes to the exciton dissociation.
Okay, thank you, sir. Last two question is there. What is the maximum efficiency possible by flexible solar cell? Are they used in real world on bulk scale?
Yes. The flexible solar cell people so there are researchers who made printed solar cells on A4 size transparent substrate. It's a transparency like that. So the best they could go is about 5%. 2 to 5% is the numbers which they report. Keep in mind, the higher the area, the lesser would be the conversion efficiency.
Okay.
It is not a bad thing, because if you look at the silicon solar cell, we may see a panel which is very big panel, but if you go closely and look at it, each panel is made up of multiple number of small silicon solar cells. So higher the area, lesser is the efficiency. So what you can do is you make small area solar cells and you connect them in series. When you connect them in series, the current gets amplified. Okay, and then you make a big panel, then you make parallel. When you make it parallel, then the voltage increases. So that's how the overall solar cell business goes. The way the panels are made. Okay, so to answer your question, the efficiency for a flexible solar cell is not much. The flexibility comes with the cost in terms of efficiency. So efficiency is not much, but as I said, these are all the kinds of things which people want to play with it in order to make it. Now, what about the real world efficiency, real world example? Yes, I can point out to a company in Bangalore which made flexible solar cell on umbrellas. So you can walk in the sun, protecting yourself from the sun rays, and then keep charging your mobile. Something like that. These are the kind of things. And there is also an example of flexible solar cell being deposited on a bus stop, rooftop of the bus. Okay, just to include further this question, more than the fun kind of application which I just mentioned, it is being integrated into the building. Okay, the building facades. Instead of painting the building with different colors, people are making different colored solar cell panels, which are acting as a facade of the building. From far, it looks beautiful. At the same time, it would generate electricity and power the building itself. Here we don't talk about the efficiencies. It's mostly the imagine now there is nothing. Now we have something. That's how it is.
So last question: how much energy we can avail from 1M by 1M flexi solar cell?
1 meter by 1 meter.
Yeah, 1 meter by 1 meter flexi solar cell.
I cannot answer. I'm sorry. I do not know the answer.
Yeah. So I hope maximum participants got their answer.
A4 size it is 2%. Yeah, that I know because I have worked on that myself. A4 size. Okay, the normal A4 size, but 1 meter by 1 meter flexi solar cell, which is continuous, I'm not sure about it. For all I understand, it will never work. People may say thousand things, but no.
Thank you, sir.
There is always a possibility of discontinuity somewhere in the big area.
So Victor sir,